Almost guaranteeing the doom loop of San Francisco continues and other major cities, but we're talking about San Francisco again today. Because of the downtown slump, property values have declined, which has skyrocketed the number of property owners who are appealing for lower taxes. And guess what? Vast majority of them, unlike in years past, they're going to get their appeals because property values have nosedived. How much? Let's get into it. Here we go. This video is from a year ago. This is San Francisco office tower sells at steep discount. This is what got us there. Because taxation is based on usually a floating 3-year average, especially in the commercial sector. And this is one of those data points that shows just how much property values have come down. And now all the folks are looking to appeal.
It is a San Francisco office tower that was once the home of several businesses, but it just sold at an eye-popping discount. The new owner of the building bought it at 90% off the price it sold for in 2016. It's just one of the signs the city is still struggling with massive office vacancies downtown. But as NBC Bay Area's 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗣𝗦 reports, there's a sign a turnaround may be coming.
Maybe.
Market and 6th Streets is the historic David Hughes building. Right now it's empty with a large for lease sign posted over the first floor entrance. Just a few years ago, this was a bustling office space. But today, the sale price of this tower is a surprise for people who live and work nearby. It used to be valued at $62 million and sold it for $6.5 million.
Damn. That's cool. That's all right.
Big discount.
Somebody's getting a buy. That's a discount.
That's quite a significant drop. When it was first built in
yeah.
Headlines as one of the finest towers in San Francisco. Today, it's making headlines for different reasons. It sits just across the street from the Golden Gate Theater, but it's also on the edge of the Tenderloin neighborhood. And
has
been battling to make
ouch.
Let me tell you something, man. This is a movie in process. I'm dead serious. It's just amazing the things that go on throughout the day.
The deeply discounted price of this office tower could eventually be an opportunity for the new owner, but it also displays the dramatic difference in pricing in San Francisco real estate over for the same price of this 15-floor tower with about 4,000 feet of office space per floor. Someone can buy this 3-story, 4,300 square foot home on Union Street near Russian Hill, or for a couple million more and just 3 blocks away on Market Street, a 2-story penthouse in the luxurious Four Seasons building.
That's crazy. Crazy.
Building and others in downtown may also represent a sign of a turnaround for the city.
I think we've reached a bottom as it relates to pricing of office space in San Francisco. Growing conviction of a recovery story.
Alexander Quinn directs research on commercial property at Jones Lang LaSalle in San Francisco. He says interest in leasing of commercial properties in the city have been on the upswing over the last year. That includes companies looking to relocate from other parts of the U.S. and from other countries. What's not yet clear is how long a rebound will take. In San Francisco, 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗣𝗏, NBC.
We'll get to that. All right. So that was a year ago. And you got people talking back then. We've had a bunch of sales that have basically, 60% drop. That one was a 90% drop. Sorry, get you back to there. 90% drop. I mean, that is a massive, basically giving the building away. That's what you're doing. We can't do anything with it. Nobody wants to rent it. What do? Fire sale. So with those comparable sales out there, property owners, they have a legit argument that their values have dropped because they have. Matter of how much. And why is this so important? Because the tax revenue from commercial in your downtown cores, that one building we saw, that was more in the 6th Street. That's more in the Tenderloin area, away from the financial district, away from the downtown core, but it's still close enough where you're going to have folks that are saying, look at that building there on a per square foot basis that sold for our building now has got to be worth less. And all that revenue that the city would have received, which is a huge percentage of budgets moving forward, won't be there. So this is just going to go on forever. So because taxation is based on assessed values in the past, you're really feeling the catch up now of sales that happened a year ago, sales that are happening right now. And it's an ongoing thing. With record vacancies in San Francisco's office buildings and home prices down, number of property owners appealing to lower their property taxes has skyrocketed to the highest level since at least the Great Recession of 2009. Number of appeals challenging city property assessments, the dollar amount a city says a property is worth, and the basis for calculating taxes owed shot up more than 2.5 times in the recent initial filing period for fiscal 23 and 24 compared to all of last year. Because people are getting their assessments now and they're going, wait a minute, that seems really high. And it is. And so there's, a big process that folks go through to appeal. I used to do a lot of appraisals where people thought that their values were high and they thought that having me, a residential appraiser, come in and giving an appraisal might change the county's mind. But a lot of times it didn't, because you got to look specifically at the criteria of what year your assessment is identifying the valuation period, what year those values were. And that's super important because we saw in the video, it was 2016. They paid, how much was it? Whatever. And then, 2024, 90% drop down to 6 point whatever million. That's a deal. That is a deal. Guaranteed. I don't care what shape the building is in. The dirt alone has to be worth way more than that. And yet, in order to give it away, you want to be a thrill seeker and, I bought a property, a really tall one in the Tenderloin. All right, let's go visit it at 1:00 in the morning. We'll just see what's going on, right? You got to have some balls to buy that kind of property. But those total amount people requested to be shaved from their property valuations hit $52.3 billion. That's valuation. If all the appeals were granted, more than $600 million would be wiped from the city's property tax roll, though that is very unlikely because a bunch of the appeals will not go through for various reasons. People give up in the appeals process. People didn't understand. Okay, it was over that time period. Oh, man. So it's super time period specific. Number of appeals received for the filing period ending September 15th ballooned to 7,508, up from 2,873 for the entire 22-23 fiscal year. So what you've got is you've got a bunch of data points. You've got a bunch of comparable sales that have happened that are now available within the time periods people are talking about to basically go back and say, hey, I'd like a little bit of reduction in assessed value because your valuation is too high. And they've got this is one of those time periods where they've got legit claims to a valuation coming down. Now, in my years appraising for residential adjustments to be made, only a handful of my appraisals over 30-something plus years ever resulted in an actual reduction. What you have to prove is you have to prove that the assessor basically either made a mistake, they've got wrong information, or they missed comparable sales, which is pretty rare if you've got a property in play. You got to come up with something pretty legit. And the marketplace itself in San Francisco, they're showing some legit drops in value. The highest number lodged, that's the highest number lodged we just talked about since the end of 2008 in the midst of the Great Recession. Total of 6,620 appeals were filed for the 2009-10 fiscal year compared to 7,508. I know I'm throwing a lot of data at you here, but bottom line is the number of people appealing is skyrocketing. More could still be coming, as it's typical for the city to get as many as 350 additional applications during the rest of the year, he said. So, I mean, you're just looking at a buttload of appeals. How many of those will go through? Well, the assessor's department, their job is to basically hold the line, toe the line. Nope, we got to keep your values up because otherwise those taxes start to come down, and we can't have that, Lord forbid, because we've already got massive budget going sideways. Many times, cases are either rejected or withdrawn. The Assessor Recorder's Office said in a 2021 annual report that more than 1,000 cases were closed with 97% of values maintained. And that has been my experience on the residential end as an appraiser for over 30 years. Most of the evaluations, people would come back and say, I sent in your appraisal report, and guess what? This is what the county said. And I'm like, yep. County's right. You don't have an argument. Yeah, but I just paid you XYZ for an appraisal. And I explained to you my market valuation was going to be as of, if you guys want something different, we can talk about that. But bottom line is you probably don't have a really great argument to appeal your taxes. Article goes on to say that the assessor's staff is going to add some staff to handle the additional workload. Not a shocker. Volume of recent requests nevertheless poses a risk to the city's finances. I have great concern we may not have the income derived from assessed values deriving taxes. Concern. According to a budget document posted online Thursday by the mayor's office that identified an array of potential threats looming amid a projected deficit of nearly $800 million over the next 2 fiscal years. All right, that's what they're identifying at. Could that be higher? Could that be lower? Yeah, obviously. They're just throwing it out there. Well, based on what we see, what we've seen in the past, this is what's going to probably happen. A June report from the city controller said the 23-24 budget already assumed $2.5 billion of reductions in current year local assessment values over the course of the 2 budget years. I mean, who knows what it's actually going to be? And there's going to be a bunch of people who aren't going to appeal. They're just not going to do it. They're loaded, whatever. They're not required to. They just own the buildings, whatever. It's not going to be on their bucket list of things to do. So, but if you are paying, top tax dollar and your income has shrunk dramatically because a lot of buildings, I think you've still got a 34% vacancy rate in the downtown core in San Francisco. That is the official numbers. Who knows, right? So it's assumed that refunds of $64 million in general fund revenue from appeals filed this fiscal year and $103 million from appeals filed in the next fiscal year to be paid. These are refunds. Hundreds of millions of dollars in refunds going back, and then moving forward, people getting these assessments reduced because property values plummeted. The recent appeals concern some of the city's most iconic properties. Here we get into it. Entities affiliated with the Golden State Warriors, reportedly the most valuable franchise in the NBA, they're seeking to get more than $1 billion whacked off the assessed value of the Chase Center arena where the team plays and surrounding properties, records show. What kind of argument can you make there? And these buildings do not sell. Yeah, where do you get comparable sales for an arena? They're pretty rare, right? And maybe you go way back in time, go to other cities, whatever that might be. We just recently had property in Hunts Point here in Bellevue, residential property, but it was $63 million sell. That was Jeff Bezos' property that he basically ditched out on, kind of his last sayonara to Seattle. He took his soon-to-be wife, and they've moved to Florida. But $63 million property in Hunts Point, that's the biggest, most expensive property. That's a home, single-family home that sold. Wild numbers. And so that property is out there, and we've been working on an appeal of a property on the other side of Hunts Point. And, you've only got a handful of comps out there of super high-end properties like that. But in San Francisco right now, you've got a ton of comps for, your basic properties, commercial-wise, in excess of the of the Chase Center, which is, obviously one of a kind, but each major city has a couple of those, right? Team has made similar appeals for the past several years, portions of which have been rejected according to city records. Maybe this is the year their appeal goes through. Asked about the latest appeal, a team spokesman said via email, the assessor pegged the value of the land at more than twice the actual $150 million purchase price. Okay. Yeah, but maybe it's worth that. We don't know. What comps do you have? What data do you have to support values have dropped? Well, there's a lot out there, right? We just saw an example of that. But you're talking dirt specifically, which is an unreasonable and unsupported by any facts. She did not address a follow-up question about the rest of the team's request. Were the team granted its entire request, it would save the owners nearly $12.3 million in annual taxes. So you can see $1 billion they want reduced. That's only going to account for $12.3 million in annual taxes saved to the homeowner. See, even though you might have a super high property value, you get it reduced 10, 15, 20%, whatever you're asking for, your tax savings isn't necessarily in proportion to the way the valuations dropped. It's not really how it works, right? The owners of the Trans Bay Tower, also known as the Salesforce Tower, asked for $564 million to be taken off that building's assessed valuation of $1.87 billion. For tax savings, again, it's not that much. $6.6 million in taxes. But when you look collectively that every single commercial building is probably eligible, except for the ones that have just recently been purchased, and especially the ones purchased in 2016, 17, 18, 19, right before the pandemic. And that's when we see valuations start to plummet. Vacancy rate in San Francisco's office market was at a record high of 34% in the third quarter. This article was written in the fourth quarter and then it was updated in January. It's according to the real estate firm. But looking back at some of the sales, and especially the sales that we are seeing happen now, moving forward, you do not have property values going up. You might have a bottoming out, and I think that is what we are seeing. We are seeing a bottoming out specifically of the San Francisco commercial real estate market. And that's me as a residential guy, so don't put a whole lot of weight in that. But I follow these stories as much as anybody, and I have an understanding kind of what's going on from a market standpoint by being a real estate broker, designated managing broker, and an appraiser, basically an appraiser most of my adult life and certainly my adult career till I got into this YouTube gig here. So now I just kind of throw out facts and go, hey, trust me. No, this one's a pretty easy one to call. Property values have absolutely tanked. Tax revenue will go down. The doom loop continues. Is it bottoming out? And I've been saying this for a little bit. I think it is. I really honestly think it is. Because when you take off 90% of value, you can't go much lower. You really can't go much lower. And these buildings still have value. So when you take a 90%, hey, we paid 10% relative to what you paid for it in 2016, doesn't take much in the way. Even if you've got some debt on that $6 million purchase, doesn't take much in the way of, a handful of tenants you get in there. You can make those payments. And then, you got that upside potential. Now, the one thing I would say here is that you've got street conditions to contend with. San Francisco, you've got street conditions. Seattle, you've got street conditions. Portland, you've got street conditions. You go into these downtown areas and you start looking around, and that's what Meadowleo is famous for. You start looking around, main floor retail, all vacant, for lease signs. You look up at these buildings, like the video said, you see a lot of for lease, for sale at times. You just don't have the number of employers wanting to put their employees into these buildings because they might get killed by some whack job with a machete who's out of his mind on meth, and he's just running down the street doing Lord knows what. Those are conditions on top of just basic economic conditions like the interest rates that have bumped up. In 2016, You had some lower interest rates, and they went down as we went into the pandemic. Now, owners of these buildings trying to refinance who've lost a ton of tenants, they can't because it doesn't make sense. And with the comps that are out there, they're not able to get an appraisal that makes sense to do a refinance. They're forced to sell. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. And that's exactly the basis of the article, which is assessments are skyrocketing. Expect that to continue. Expect to hear city officials continue to talk about a drop in tax revenue. This is part of where that comes from. All right. That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being here. I'll catch up with you in the next one. Bye for now.